You are looking at a currently untitled piece that is my examination of a tree horse of sorts. And this is a relatively fresh piece. I've been working on it for a couple of days, so I really don't yet have the language to speak to it. But I know one of the most common questions I asked is, how did I get here? Where did this idea come from? And how did I grow this retinue of marks or different ways in which to speak to this idea? And, in many cases, it's a pretty basic thread or commonality between my work as it progresses. The most recently piece often has the biggest influence or the biggest impact on my starting point for the next one. And that's most certainly the case here, because this currently unfinished painting happened as an immediate response to some of the what ifs that bubbled up when I randomly chose the painting Effervescent, which you can see over on the left, for a rework while waiting for some other pieces completely unrelated to these two to dry. And strangely enough, Effervescent didn't really feel like a tree piece when I began her rework. But she was a very busy painting and needed simplification. And given that I had value pathways on my mind from the other piece that I was working on, it seemed like a very natural way to apply the what if to the painting Effervescent. The what if I created a value pattern here that didn't exist before? And I utilized the marks that were already down there on the piece and an approach of simplification of form to unify a prior painting into something that felt a little bit more cohesive or connected based on some value pathways. And I felt so in love with these crabapple-like branches, these gnarly fingered, berry-ridden or fruit-laden branches, and how they twisted with the body of the fox and through, and as a result almost of the body of the fox, into the negative space around them. And I was just so in love with this that I had to do it again. Some of you may know that I call this the more syndrome, or the toddler syndrome, where I encounter something that I really love and I just can't get enough of it. I have to completely saturate myself in it going forward. And so hence the horse painting that you see on the right, which was or is my attempt to intentionally start this relationship between tree or branch work and form and see what happens as I allow it to evolve. Now, I tend to start from a very literal perspective, and the fox happened in an intuitive way. There are multiple paintings underneath her, and they all inform the decisions that end up on the top of them. So the fox was a happy accident that showed up. Nevertheless, I love her so much. I want to explore why I love that, why I love the elements of this so much, and play with some other ideas to invite that kind of a relationship to the surface. So, there is a very direct correlation between these two pieces, but I want to introduce the concept to you that this is actually an idea that showed up in my work many years ago, but I saw it as something completely and totally different at the time. Let's go back a year. The painting on the left is a piece called The Quick Brown Fox, and you see her adjacent to this new horse piece. The Quick Brown Fox was a result of my immersion in autumnal colors, a walk in the woods, using a fox as a container for all of that, and also really playing with the positive negative space, specifically the use of gesso or a white or lightest value, high key value area in the painting as part of the design element. This was directly related to a lot of the drawings that I was doing into wet gesso at the time. This was simply a colored version on stretched canvas. There are great connections between these two. Both present the animal as a vessel of the landscape or a container of the landscape in which they live. Talks about the relationship between environment and life forms or the ecosystems that are contained inside of those. And they also have seasonal aspects to them. And they are centralized shapes on a ground pretty close to the picture plane, maybe even silhouetted shapes in a way, although the silhouettes are treated differently. There are lots of similarities between these two paintings, even though they were made over a year apart. But the Quick Brown Fox wouldn't have happened without another painting that happened just a few months prior to her. And actually, I just said a few months, but I think these paintings happened pretty close or adjacent to each other. And I suppose the sequence is irrelevant. What I'm trying to present to you is the notion that there are repetitions and different design, concept, idea approaches that continue to resurface throughout the timeline of our work. And these happen in a non-linear way often and can be so distanced from each other that we really don't immediately see them or clue in even to the fact that these are things that we are investigating or questioning in our work. And if we want to go back even further, the whole fact that I'm able to paint trees like I have in this new piece is because I spent a very intense time frame studying trees exclusively and quite irrationally for a few months in 2022. So prior excursions into little mini-series or topics that really grabbed me at that moment continue to fuel work years down the road, even though that little venture into into trees wasn't necessarily planned. It just showed up and, it was like a shiny object and I had to chase it. That work is paying off. It's continuing to pay off. And I probably could even say that my excavation or exploration last 2 summers ago of the abstract landscape has also informed the work that I am creating right now, as well as having been pulled off of or continuing to feed off of paintings like Exhale that you see in the upper right corner. So art is not created in a vacuum. An idea, it doesn't just show up without rhyme or reason. It comes because it's been invited in by the other work that we've been doing. And if we structure the work that we're doing to align with the things that are most fascinating to us, the things that we have the strongest body response to, that means that the work is really going to align up and feel incredibly relevant and significant. And I haven't even factored in my must-haves yet. So, the relationship between the two Fox paintings was strengthened by the spin-off or the mini-series that I did of tree paintings. And that accumulated knowledge combined with additional technique and growth and fueled by new interests over the following year resulted in my wanting to do an oil study of the Quick Brown Fox. Now, with these two paintings, first of all, there's a huge size difference in them both. The Quick Brown Fox, I believe, is 36 or 48 inches tall. The oil study on the right is only 12 inches tall. And they were done over a year apart from each other. They were done in different media. And I think it's also important to point out that I feel pretty competent working in acrylic paint, and I feel very much like a novice and the oil. So they also came from a very different confidence level or mindset approach. Nevertheless, when I set out to learn oil painting, and I decided that the primary exercise through which I was going to begin that journey was via making studies of my own work, I wasn't thinking of this as an exercise, the oil painting of the Quick Brown Fox, to become a catalyst for new acrylic works. I was thinking of it under the framework or the umbrella of I'm setting down to learn oil paint, and this is the lens and this is my focus. And that was the context under which the oil study on the right was created. However, what happens when you have all these sorts of ideas rubbing elbows and shoulders together in the studio? Of course, there is going to be cross-pollination. When I began this oil study, and I knew I was going to use the Quick Brown Fox as my starting point, I also gave myself permission to respond intuitively and try to follow a what if in the oil paint. This was something that I hadn't done before, and I really wasn't certain how it was going to turn out. I struggled with that rabbit. I struggled enormously with that rabbit and with the quantity of product on the page and all sorts of other things. But I really loved this design, beyond or separate from the fact that it was an oil painting study exercise. I walked away looking at this design or composition, thinking there was something really good here that was related to the prior fox painting, but also pointed in a new direction and got me excited. So when I have that pulling or that tug, of course I'm going to indulge it. That's telling me this is a valid or important thing for me to dig into and learn from. This is an opportunity for me to learn and grow, utilizing my interest level, my curiosity, my physical response to an idea as a gauge as to whether or not I want to follow it. So I absolutely indulged in myself. And that indulgence brought me to this point. So on the right, you now have an acrylic painting or study. I think she's 16 by 20-ish. Inspired by or utilizing the oil study as my starting point. I am evolving. I'm letting this idea blossom and grow, and I'm exploring differences, giving myself permission to chase what ifs as they bubble up. You can see that there's a lot of similarities, but also differences in these two works. I am looking at things that might work, like solidifying the fox's body, filling it with darkness or more of a wooded element, since the rabbit is a ground level creature. I am playing with the idea of interrupted tree lines. I allowed the rabbit to relax a little bit more, but I also made the fox a little bit more intent. I intentionally kept their gazes in opposing directions. I feel like if they were looking at each other, it would become a more private or introverted painting. Whereas if they are looking outward, that includes the viewer in that invitation to be aware of their surroundings. So, the piece is very different. I'm still exploring or sticking with some of the most basic components of my series of work, but I'm giving myself permission to try new things, to sort of follow that new pathway, follow that curiosity, and see what I can gather as I learn more about it and bring back into the work. So this little acrylic painting is related to all of the prior work, but also sort of pointing in another new direction, because she is going to fuel something else. And I also kind of want to point out, because I love these little segues, or no, not segues, a little side story, tangent. I've been thinking that this painting was unfinished for a long time, and I haven't really looked at her for probably a month to 6 weeks, and she's feeling finished to me right now. So just thought that's an important thing to share, kind of a realization when you let something breathe that maybe it doesn't need more work. All right, anyway, let's go forward. I fell so in love with that rabbit in the piece and in the piece on the right that I wanted to paint her again. And I did this particular shape a couple more times. The other painting is similar to Transients, which you see on the left, just a different colorway and different relationship or scale of the shape inside the proportions of the piece. But you know, the idea or the concept of the fox in the trees is still very fascinating to me, but the rabbit just grabbed me and tugged at me. And I needed to paint her some more. And in the process of painting her more, come to understand what it was that I valued so much about her shape, her body language, the narrative that I was reading into that, and how I could utilize or leverage the weight of her form in different design shapes or different perimeters of ratios, proportions of a painting, or a rectangular versus square relationship. Play with that and see what I learned in that regard. And also now while I'm looking at this, I noticed that in the painting on the right, the rabbit actually is pretty split with a nice hard edge between light and dark values. And that isn't something that I was consciously aware of when I was working with her in the past. So that is something that I can absolutely take forward, you know, as I continue this mini-series exploration of rabbits in this shape. I can think about how I stretch or utilize values in an arbitrary way across the shape of the rabbit. So, you know, it's so easy to sink my teeth into an idea and then get distracted by something like, oh yeah, I need to think about that, or oh yeah, I want to think about that. But because I work on so many paintings at once, it's really easy for me to follow these multiple chains of thought. Not that I'm literally following them all at once, but when the rabbit paintings are sitting there drying, or another piece of work is sitting there drying, I have the opportunity to bring another painting onto the easel and work on that. And that's what happened here with Effervescent, which is in the process of being reworked. That's the painting that you see on the right, and she's adjacent to the fox rabbit piece that stemmed from the oil study. The Effervescent rework is an acrylic piece, and I think she's 18 by 24. And I had pulled her out, and I was going to send her off as some gallery inventory, and at the last minute I decided that the painting wasn't done. And I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, because she has been available for purchase and on my website for a bit, and the second that I have to send her out in the world, I change my mind. But really it was with hindsight, and that hindsight was fueled by knowledge or wisdom that I had gathered or experienced miles into my brush, where I could see that I could make the painting better. And I had the opportunity to hold on to it and do that, which is exactly what I did. So looking at Effervescent, she was incredibly busy, very complex, very beautiful, like a glass of sparkling water. Lots of little details and reflections and things to look at, but very little contrast. And I'll pop an image of the painting as it was when I started at the tail end of this. You'll see slides of all the work, so you can view them in greater detail. But anyways, I knew that I needed to simplify her. I started by blocking in some basic dark values. I'll also say that as busy as the painting was and chaotic, it was also pretty much all mid values. There wasn't a whole lot of, there was very little value pathway, very little value jumps. It was just a cacophony of color and light little delightful dancy marks. So I knew to improve her, she needed a value pattern. And because I've been so focused on value pathways, I opted for that. Because I have been painting so many trees and woodland scenes, and there were traceries or little line drawings inside Effervescent of a crabapple tree, I went with it. I ran with it. It was right there. And look what happened. The second I started to really just follow my intuition and enable those what ifs to lead my exploration, lead my mark making, my decision making, the piece feels so much more cohesive. It feels magical. It has a direction that is really tugging at me, just like the rabbit did in the painting on the right. So of course, what do? I set myself up to play with that relationship of a tree versus container in a variety of different ways. And that was how the horse tree, or the tree horse, came about. So, clearly these are similar but different, and that similarity and different, that chain of similarities and differences can be strung back. I just went back over 2 years through my portfolio. I could probably go back even further and continue to delineate that. Why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing this with you to illustrate the reason why I strongly encourage reflection, critical thinking, comparison and contrast, not just inside the small window or compressed time frame of a couple of weeks or a couple of months, but looking more globally at what it is that you've created and being open or aware, paying attention to the repetitions, the influences, the things that continue to show up. Things are going to show up, they're going to feel familiar because they're ideas that you've explored before, but they're also going to show up because they're ideas that your subconscious thinks is important for one reason or another. Paying attention to that is what's going to help you grow your voice. It's going to help you understand and appreciate what your subconscious, what your intuition, what your muse, call it whatever you want to, what it values, what it really holds precious or sacred, more so than other things. And that's sort of the real estate that you sink your creative teeth into and start to make your work from. So a timeline of ideas can be built by reviewing your work, looking for similarities or overlaps. You can allow those similarity or overlaps as they happen to tangentially give you an opportunity to take a quick little, side trip, a road trip. And I promise you that, it's going to feed or fuel future decision making. And what's also going to happen if you get stressed out and you can't follow a tangent, or there's like an explosion of things that you all of a sudden feel the need to follow, but you simply don't have the means to do that, don't stress. Don't worry about this. I promise you, the important ideas are going to circle back. They may disappear for a bit because you're distracted by other shiny things, but I promise you that they are going to circle back and they're going to show up later on. And they're going to continue to do that until you give yourself permission to follow them, or you give yourself the opportunity to follow them. So I'm going to end the speaking part of this video lesson, and it's got a little a footnote or a little tale of individual slides of all of the paintings that I referenced. So feel free to halt the video at any of those images if you want to study them more intently. This painting is the Elder. She is 48 inches high by 24 wide, acrylic from 2022. This is Pride. She is the same size, 24 by 48, acrylic on panel from March of 2022. Both of those paintings were done in March. This is the Quick Brown Fox, acrylic on a gallery wrapped canvas. She is 36 by 24 and done in the fall of 23. This is Exhale, 50 inches square, acrylic on gallery wrap canvas, also done in the fall of 23. Untitled acrylic painting, acrylic on panel, 16 by 20, done in fall of 24. "24-inch square acrylic on panel, done in fall of 24. The starting point of Effervescent, acrylic on panel, 18 by 24. This is where the next slide originated from. This is the rework of Effervescent. All of her details stay the same. Actually, original Effervescent was created summer of 24, and this happened in November of 24. And that piece fueled this currently untitled one, which is a 20 by 24 cradled panel done in acrylic. And I got to the end and realized I forgot to put my little oil study in. So here is this 9 by 12 oil on Stonehenge oil paper. And that was done in the fall of 24.